On this week's Eastern Conference edition of Locked On NHL, all head coaching hirings are now complete with the Columbus Blue Jackets naming Dean Evason their bench boss. We'll discuss that, plus the best and worst goalie situations in the East. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. We have local experts covering the biggest stories all across the sports world. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week over at Locked On Ottawa Senators, and every Wednesday with me to break down the Eastern Conference is Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, and Mikey, it almost feels like with the head coach hiring in Columbus, all the dust can say it's more or less settled outside of restricted free agents.
Yeah, that may have been like the final piece of the puzzle for the offseason outside of anything that, will come out of left field. But yeah, you got your RFAs, you got a couple of these deals that are kind of filtering through. But there was that one last kind of coaching hire that still needed to be done. There was a GM hiring as well. But that seems to be about the last of it for the Eastern Conference. And now we've got all 16 coaches in place. I like the hire, actually. I think that's a pretty solid pickup for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Dean Evason, when he was in Minnesota, a lot of people spoke very glowingly about Evason and what he was able to get out of that group. So I think that, he's going to go into a Columbus team that I would say underachieved last year. Like, I think they're on the up and up, I guess you could say, as a franchise. So a guy like Dean Evason, I think, is a pretty solid player, or a pretty solid coach to get them going in the right direction.
And it's always the second job where a coach can really be judged. You know what I mean? It feels like there's always that first, divorce almost, it feels like. I know in Ottawa, we're having that discussion with Travis Green where it didn't go so great in Vancouver. But what are you going to learn from that? Whereas for Dean Evason, the regular season seemed to always go pretty well outside of the start. 5 wins in the first 19 games is what cost him his job last year. Well, we can get into how it was some of the worst goaltending in the National Hockey League at the time of the firing. But if you look at his overall career, a 639 points percentage, Columbus as an organization in history has to be well on the other side of 500. So I think just bringing in a guy who's used to winning a whole heck of a lot more than losing is going to be a good kind of way to up the standard as a team as a whole. A lot of these young kids don't know anything but struggling to win games at the NHL level. So I think to bring in that standard is going to be a good hire in Columbus.
And he's a bit of a hard ass too, right? So he'll demand a lot out of his players, but not in, like a Tortorella kind of donkey-ish way. And I mean, I respect Tortorella. I'm just, we know what happened with Cutter Gauthier and what the theory was there. Like, that's not necessarily like that. He's not Babcock per se. But he will demand a lot out of his players, and I think that'll be really good for that kind of young group. They need someone, to go in and try and cultivate something in that locker room and try and create a good culture. And I think that Evason will be able to do that.
Still has never been out of the first round of the playoffs, though.
No,
that's what's evading him.
I mean, that Minnesota team just was never like that good, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Columbus is not that good either. They've got a long ways to go. They're going to have to build that program up. They're going to have to get the Kent Johnsons, the Adam Fantillis of the world to grow into those superstars that they're hoping they do. Maybe Cole Sillinger ends up rebounding back and turning into a good piece. They got David Juracek on the back end. They've got a bunch of really, really solid pieces. They've just all now need to develop at this point. And I think bringing in Evason, hopefully they can get to that point. And for their sake, I mean, this is a team that's won one round in their entire existence, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Amazing. Well, are we counting them beating the Leafs in the qualifying round?
No, I'm not
Okay.
technically.
Okay. So the Leafs didn't make the playoffs that year. You heard it from Mike DiStefano.
All right, sure. All right. Besides that, they've only one real playoff, I suppose, and then whatever
Which
that
is
bubble thing
hilarious. Which is hilarious too, because that one series win was against the best team at that point in NHL history, the 2019 Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, and they loaded up. They brought in Duchesne. They brought in who else? They bring in that.
Separate deals.
Yeah, like they made a couple of big deals, and that was decided to like keep
They
Bobrovsky on board. They kept Panarin on board.
Yeah, and
They just
just
had a
let them
bunch of
expire.
let everyone expire, and they're like, we're making a run. We're just gonna do it. We need to win a round, and they did.
I respect the way that they went into that, but you obviously wish that you were able to make it 2, 3, and
Would have been
ultimately
nice.
4 to lift the Stanley Cup. For more on the Dean Evason hiring, go check out Locked On Blue Jackets. And among those great young pieces you mentioned, how about Caden Lidstrom, the 4th overall pick from this draft, was on with Jay Forster on Locked On Blue Jackets this week. So super cool that even in the middle of the summer, lots of great content all across the Locked On Podcast Network. And he also gave his thoughts on Dean Evason coming to Columbus. You can go check that out at Locked On Blue Jackets. Not the only 4th overall pick on a podcast this week on the Locked On Podcast Network. Brady Tkachuk, Locked On Senator today. One of those ones where it just magically works out, Mikey. We got our white whale, definitely on the Mount Rushmore of guests we wanted, but he might even be top 2 with Daniel Alfredson. So I was awesome getting to chat with him and vehemently deny some trade rumors that were sparking from some prominent accounts online.
I know the Locked On Sens army is definitely going to be Sen Central. The Sen Central citizens are going to be happy about that podcast. It's a good get, brother. It's a good get.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. And we love what you're doing over at Locked On Maple Leafs. We do have local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week. Off season, what off season? Sports are 365 these days. I'm fired up for the Olympics too. I'm going to get onto FanDuel, have some fun with that responsibly, of course. But we've got a whole lot more to get to in today's show, including the best up next and maybe the worst goaltending situations in the Eastern Conference. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Sure, it's summer. We don't want sports to stop. And thanks to Paris 2024, we can really enjoy summer sports. Yeah, you got baseball, but how about the fact that the Olympics are here? And on FanDuel, you can go and check out the odds for the overall medal winners, and you can be more specific as well. FanDuel keeps the sports going, and this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back, Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network and really appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. We do have all off-season news covered in every sport, too. I saw the Locked On NFL guys are starting their rankings. We love getting mad at lists, Mikey, and this was a list that caught my attention. The Athletic is currently doing a tiered system for goaltending rankings, and it was like, some of the things within it, and I get it. They were making it almost so kind of, how do I say this? They had tiers of how they were doing each team. Yeah. So it's pretty objective of how they're going to make it, as most lists are, but some of them got me fired up. So I said, why don't I make my own list if I'm so mad at this one? So I think there's also a level of this conversation that centers around the fact that the Boston Bruins no longer have that two-headed monster of Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman. Last year, they would be my easy choice for the best goaltending situation in the Eastern Conference. Do you agree with that statement? And whether you do or don't, who's #1 for you right now?
Well, you're looking at, a tandem that in back-to-back years, I believe, won the William Jennings in those two those two individuals. So yeah, I think it'd be hard to say that those two did not stand as the best tandem, the best situation. But it's interesting having this discussion and having this conversation. Like, how much do you value the backup? Because like, shouldn't Andre Vasilevsky be in this conversation pretty heavily? Like, he's a guy who will go out there and play his 60, 62 games. You only need 20 games out of your backup goaltender. So I don't know if that necessarily hurts Tampa's situation a whole lot like it would maybe, Toronto's with the fall off potentially from like a Woll to a Stolarz. The fall off doesn't matter as much from a guy like Bobrovsky or from a guy like Vasilevsky, who are workhorses that play a 60 plus games a year.
Vasilevsky to me is a fascinating case. He could very well be in the running for the Vezina next year, but just the slow start for me this year and the fact that he's played so much more hockey than other goalies. That's the big one for me.
Like he was coming off an injury, like he had that off-season back surgery, and it took him a little bit to even get going on the year. Like I can't look at last season and believe that it was the start of the decline to Vasilevsky. I'm going to need to see it again this year in order to really believe it. So until I do, I still think I'm going to have him as the top goaltender in the league, thus top goaltender in the Eastern Conference. I mean, if I'm the Tampa Bay Lightning, I'm ecstatic with my goalie situation.
Yeah, and you're looking at maybe a blessing in disguise, having that long off season, losing in the first round this year. It could almost be like a reset for Vasilevsky to have a healthy summer after back-to-back tough playoffs, and for the first time not having a save percentage above 900. He was right at it, but he's been above it and far above it in every year since before.
Well, think about his last four off seasons, right? Cup final, cup final, cup final. Out in the first round, however, he ended up having to undergo back surgery, so couldn't get a full, recovery in the summer, right? It was more about rehabbing as opposed to recovery. This will be the first time in 5 years he's had a full off season to rest, recover. And I think that'll certainly benefit him going forward. I still believe in Vasilevsky and that goaltending tandem. So I guess, that's a team that's up there. The Rangers, pretty high up there.
Let's get into the Rangers in a sec. I just want to finish my point on Vasilevsky and how much he's played. 115 playoff games, Mikey. That's 14th in NHL history, and he's 29 years old.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
That's incredible. And if he plays 7 games in the first round next year, he would be 12th on that list behind Chris Osgood and Henrik Lundqvist, just ahead of him.
Yeah.
Those are some guys who played a lot of hockey.
That's pretty solid. He's played.
Hey, where'd Lundqvist play? Talk about a little segue.
There you go. Right in from Lundqvist into Igor Shesterkin. What an heir to the throne that's been.
I just look at Igor Shesterkin. His numbers, even in the KHL, to me, he was as highly anticipated as a Panarin. Well, I guess maybe less of a Panarin, maybe more of a Kaprizov, who was just tearing it up. Like, when's this guy coming over? His win percentage in the KHL was ridiculous, but you're always like, how's it going to translate? He jumped right in and hit the ground running. To me, he is right there with Vasilevsky. And I know that they're not in the Four Nations tournament, but like, if they're in the Olympics, like, who starts for Russia? They have a 3-headed monster because we haven't even touched on Ilya Sorokin, who I think could be a great bounce back candidate for this upcoming season as well.
I agree, man. Like, you could argue it would last like 3-4 years, like 1, 2, 3. Like, those are the 1, 2, 3 in the entire league. Like, obviously, Hellebuck deserves some respect in that conversation.
Saros, that to me would be the only other.
A little bit Saros, but like those three, man, like it's unbelievable. Those are all in the Eastern Conference. Like, it's really top heavy when it comes to Eastern Conference goaltending. On Locked On Leafs, we did like an Atlantic Division power ranking for goaltending tandems, and we quickly realized how scarce it gets after like the top couple of teams in the East and in the division. And then it really gets to like tandems. I mean, you look at Montreal, they're rolling with, Montembeault and Primo. Like, there's just some question marks there. Toronto's got Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz. There's some question marks there. Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. There are question marks. What's even going to be in net for the Philadelphia Flyers? I don't know. I've got no idea. Charlie Lindgren, That's a big question mark for the Washington Capitals. What are you going to get out of Tristan Jarry? Either really good play or really bad play.
This is the most high and low position in sports, because you could convince me that Korpisalo bounces back and does a great job with Jeremy Swayman, and maybe he's not going to play like Linus Ullmark did games played wise, but he was the worst goalie in the league last year. It just year to year, I was going to say 3 guys that you can count on, but even last year for Ilya Sorokin, you saw that he was bound to have a down year. So it is as much luck as anything else, because these guys are all so talented. They see so much rubber. We're talking about, like, if one guy lets in 2 more goals on 50 shots, all of a sudden, like, that could be the difference here between who's ranked higher. It's so tight at the top. Goaltending is in such a good spot right now. I was worried when years ago now, I'm almost dating myself. I was worried that when they made the pad smaller, like 11 inches wide instead of 12, that it was really going to affect the goalies. And it did for a couple of years. But as we see with other sports, Mikey, it's just like the athletes will be able to respond to that. And they're going to find a way to make it so that they're doing their best, even despite having to get a reduction and have to maybe change the way they've played because the equipment isn't on as much as it was. So, yeah, I think that you're looking at Tampa, the New York Rangers, and the Boston Bruins. You can't really have this conversation without Jeremy Swayman in Boston and how this tandem was with Linus Ullmark. So I guess the one question mark there with Jeremy Swayman is, how is he going to do under the pressure of starting 3 games in a week over and over again? They had a pretty much a 50-50 split rotation on, off last season. But that's the career high for Jeremy Swayman, was 44 games, 43 starts, and it just was not an option for him to play more. So you can't hold that against a guy, but you do really want to see how he's going to look when he has that one period. Not 1A, not 1B, 1. You're the guy. How are you going to go out and get it? So we'll see that in Boston with Jeremy Swayman, and we'll also see that in Ottawa with Linus Ullmark. And how's Linus Ullmark going to handle not having the Boston Bruins defense in front of him? I think that's an interesting situation to watch for this year. So that's more of the wild cards in the Eastern Conference. The Ottawas, the Buffaloes, where Pekka Luukkonen really took a step in the right direction last season. I'm talking about the wild cards now, Mikey. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in Buffalo, to me, and Devin Levi are huge wild cards. I was a little surprised that they didn't go out and bring in a veteran, almost like they did before with Craig Anderson, just to be able to take a bit of pressure. They seem to think that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, it's time for him to grab the reins and play 50 games.
He was fantastic, though, towards the end of the season last year. He almost dragged Buffalo into like a playoff position. Like, if you look at the last 6-7 weeks of the season, like, he went on a Vezina level run that I'm sure got Buffalo pretty hot and horny about this goaltender going forward. I mean, he was a big time goalie prospect a couple of years ago and then didn't really translate once he got to the NHL. But as we know, it's not a linear curve when it comes to goaltending. So sometimes it takes a couple of years for, young players to get it in the big show. And it looks like maybe something clicked for him a season ago, and they're hoping that it can carry over into this year. Now he's arrived at, what is he now, 25 years old, something like that. So he's about at that age where goaltenders start to kind of arrive into their own game. So I understand them not going after a veteran goalie just because they think they have a number one in Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. And, you also want to make sure that Devin Levi plays games too. So not getting a third goalie, I don't think was a big surprise, just because you want to make sure that both of those two are getting their games in.
On the other side, whose situations are maybe not as envious? We'll touch on that. Plus, I want to look at the RFA list, because we just talked about Jeremy Swayman in Boston and what his workload could look like. That's going to be a fascinating situation, as he still is without a contract, among a few other very important young pieces. I'm looking at you, Detroit, with Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond, both without contracts right now. How's that going to shake out? We'll discuss next. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Welcome back, Locked On NHL, your team every day, local experts on the biggest stories. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week at Locked On Senators. That's Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. The RFA situation, fascinating. Not only the names that we just mentioned before the break, but Mikey, I'm looking at names like, Matty Beniers over in Seattle, Kent Johnston, Marty Necas. He's been in conversation of
Yeah.
trades all summer. Like maybe the dust hasn't much settled as much as I made it out to be in segment one, because we sometimes see those late summer trades with RFAs where you're like, you know what? We made our best offer. We can't do it. We're going to look in another direction and try to make a big splash that way.
Yeah, that's possible too. We do see those happen from time to time in and around training camp. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's still a couple of arbitration hearings that still need to go through as well. Like I know the Maple Leafs avoided an arbitration hearing with Connor Dewar the other day. They ended up signing him to a contract extension. I would imagine we'll see a few more of these contract extensions kind of filter through in the coming weeks as those dates start to come up here. In late July, early August. But there are a couple of big names out there. You mentioned obviously Lucas Raymond and Mo Sider. They've got to get their contracts dealt with. I mean, Detroit, if they're going to take the next step, those are two big pieces of the puzzle here. So they can't be having a big standoff with those two players. They got to figure something out, and I'm sure they will. I've got no doubts that those two will be ready to go come training camp and be set to join the team. But the Jeremy Swayman one is interesting. It's almost like they probably should have got that contract signed, sealed, and delivered before officially moving on from Linus Ullmark. It's kind of interesting that that they didn't.
And not only that, like he went to arbitration last year. Like
And he said it wasn't fun.
right.
Like,
And so neither side has filed for arbitration. So they just have a feeling they're going to be able to figure this out. But every day closer to training camps, another day closer to Corpus Allo starting the home opener against the Stanley Cup champs, the Florida, or not even they're on the road. They're in Florida, banner raising night. I think it's Florida, Boston. I want to see who the home team, and that's a great way to start the season though, with the rivalry they have with a couple playoff series the last 2 years.
gotta be Florida. Gotta be a game in Florida.
I will tell you right now, pulling it up, Hockey Reference isn't helping me out. Panthers 2024-25 schedule. And then after we figure, oh my God, of course, takes me the NFL schedule. Give me a break. In Florida, October 8th, the banner goes up. Bruins in Florida. That's you need Jeremy Swayman ready for that game. There's just no two ways about it.
Oh yeah. So, I think they'll get it done though.
So those are the teams that are very happy with their goaltending. Who's a team in the East that you're kind of gritting your teeth saying, I wonder how that's going to play out?
Wow. I mean, Columbus is always like Merzlikins. I don't know what happened to this guy. He and Shesterkin kind of broke into the league together at the same time, where they spent a little bit of time in the American League after coming over from Europe, and then really got thrusted into the NHL pretty quickly and did well. And then just the last few seasons, there was that unfortunate death of his teammate. And it seems like he hasn't been the same player ever since. And there was rumors that they were trying to move on from him last year and trying to see if someone was going to try and take his contract on. Doesn't seem like anyone was willing to. So they're going to try and roll it back with him. And I guess Jack Graves is going to be the backup. I just, I don't know what you're going to get from those goaltenders. Like, is Merzlikins going to, kind of rally back to the potential starter we thought he was going to become a few years ago? I don't know. It's a big time wild card, but that's not a goaltending situation that I'd be particularly envy of.
And they're at the mercy of that Merzlikins contract too. They tried to move him last year. I think the GM at the time, Kekalainen, if not, it was afterwards. Someone in that organization said, "Look, we'd love to trade him, but nobody wants him.
Yeah,
nobody wants him." So let's see if they can get creative with it, or if they're going to almost have to time the end of their rebuild, or when they're trying to come out of it with when they can move that contract and get someone else in. But Jack Graves is one of those goalies, a little undersized, but he is a battler, and they had a great run all the way in the Calder Cup playoffs this year. They didn't win it, but they had an unbelievable run, and he was a huge reason why. I'm going to go with the Detroit Red Wings just because they were so close to the playoffs last year. They need Ville Husso to be the guy they acquired, because he wasn't that last year. he was below average. I don't think he was bad, but they just kind of went with numbers instead of quality. They went with quantity. They're like, somebody can do this, whether it's Cam
Dude.
Talbot, Jack Campbell, who else they get? They got someone else too.
Alex Lyon's still there as well, the
There you
Lion
go.
King. Like that's what I don't. Who's gonna play? Who's playing where? I don't understand what they're doing out in Detroit when it comes to the goaltending situations. They've got like 4 guys who theoretically could be NHL goaltenders. It doesn't make any sense.
In terms of the money, it's likely to be Husso and Talbot, right? But Husso's also in the last year of his deal, making
Alex
4
Lyon was like the better goalie last year for them, though. Like they're really just gonna dust. Maybe they trade him, I suppose, to a team looking for a backup. Possibly
Yeah.
that could be the case.
Yeah.
Like you're Tampa, actually. That's an upgrade over Jonas Johansson.
Like, I know it's not an NHL goalie, but they even made a minor league trade with Anaheim to bring in a 21-year-old goalie, Gage Alexander. It's just like, how many goalies in the organization do you need? Right now, they have 6 under contract in the organization. I think a lot of teams are 4 or 5, but it's a different strategy for Stevie Y. I don't know if they were burned by injuries a little bit or what the case is, but he certainly wants to make sure they have depth at that position. Now, how good is the depth? We saw Jack Campbell's last rodeo in Edmonton didn't go well, but he battled through some adversity to start in the AHL, and he actually had really good numbers in the minors last year. So I'm rooting for, obviously, easy guy to root for, but this is a team that needs to take the next step. They were so close, like a game away from making playoffs. It was like a tie, and they lost out in the tie break. So
Yeah, because Philly pulled the goalie in a tie game because they needed to win in regulation, and Washington then ended up scoring, if you recall that happening. So they scored to end up winning the game, and Detroit had taken the game to overtime and then took it to a shootout, and all they had to do was win. And then if Washington would have lost or something, then they would have made the playoffs over Washington. That was a crazy kind of ending to the season. I remember being really, really into it, and then it unfortunately it ended by Philly like giving up a goal in a tie game. It was just kind of an unfortunate way how it ended, but the race was crazy.
Oh, it was so crazy. And it's a team where when that market's buzzing, it's good for hockey. And we know our fellas over at Locked On Red Wings, they've been humming this offseason. The numbers are extraordinary, and there's
Town,
good
brother.
reason.
They call it Hockey Town for a reason.
Good reason. I've been on the other side. I'm happy to play villain in that rivalry. Obviously, Ottawa and Detroit's had some moments. It's all in good fun. It's all character and entertainment. And it's been entertaining on the ice with this Red Wings team, having Showtime Patty Kane, and now they're looking at Vladimir Tarasenko in there too as a veteran presence.
What's with veteran wingers just like ending up in Detroit late in their career? I mean, Alfie.
Oh, who? He played there?
I just want to bring it up.
Yeah, it sucks. That was really. I was having a good day, dude. We just had Brady Tkachuk on Locked On Sens. You're gonna bring that up? Worst day of one of the worst days of my adult life.
Okay, hey, they traded for Bobby Ryan like an hour later. It's all good.
There's another guy who ended his career in Detroit, veteran winger.
Oh, true. Very true.
Thomas Vanek, I think we could throw in that mix as well.
I think he did make his way over there at one point.
Brett Hull way back in the day.
Back in 2002, won the cup with them. Yep.
That line with it was the third line was Zetterberg, Datsuk, and Brett Hull.
That team is the greatest team ever built. I mean, pre cap era, but like that 01-02 Red Wings team, no one could ever beat them in a 7-game series.
And it was like the ragtag. Yeah.
Well, they played the Hurricanes, right? And like Jeff O'Neill, I talked to him all the time, and he's like, there was no chance in hell we were beating that team. He's like, I can't believe we got 1 game off. Like, that team was so good.
So good, man. So, yeah, shout out to Detroit and Hockey Town, USA. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Red Wings. All right, Mikey, any final thoughts for you on today's show?
We're going to bring up the fact that my team beat your team or what?
That was hilarious. We actually did this 7-game series. We couldn't set lines, though. It's kind of strange. Hopefully in NHL 25, they fix this. But the first game, and we just did a simulation last Wednesday. If you missed it, we each drafted the best players, or we drafted our teams in the Eastern Conference and went head-to-head in a game of NHL. And the first game went to 4 overtimes, tied at 3. And then you swept me from there. Crazy.
Yep. And we FaceTime for that and everything. Like, we were
Oh
watching
yeah.
it. We were getting into it. Like,
We'll
we're
have
gonna have to
to.
do this throughout the summer a little bit
Yeah,
more. We'll do
yeah,
another
and we'll
draft.
have to once the new game comes out, we'll actually hopefully be able to figure out a way to stream and get everybody fired up for the next season of NHL hockey. If it's anything like this last one, we're in for a treat because you mentioned the end of the season in the Eastern Conference. Remember 2 years ago there was like a 30-point gap between playoffs and not. So hopefully we get even more of those tight races and electric atmospheres in the regular season. I can't wait. Like, there's still 9 weeks, 10 weeks
Still,
before
yeah,
we
long
drop the
time.
puck. Come on. I'm ready to roll. It's amazing how quickly the hockey world goes from everything is happening, over $1 billion moved today on July
Yep.
1st to nothing.
And then 2 months of nothing.
Amazing. Got to get to the cottage when you're up in Canada, right? You got a few months to do it. And NHL executives, like, they do work basically 7 days a week from September to July. So, you know what? Maybe we'll give them a couple weeks. Although there are a lot of general managers and organizations that still have work to do on the RFA front.
Yeah.
Some really
Last I
good names.
checked, they got phone and internet plans that stretch up to Muskoka. Last I
Yeah, they
checked.
do.
So
Yeah, they do. All right. That's Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Ottawa Senators. Go check out our interview with Brady Tkachuk as your second listen today. Caden Lidstrom on Locked On Blue Jackets, or you can just go chill with Jay as he breaks down the Dean Evason hiring. This has been another Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day.